It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth, financial literacy educator and speaker, entrepreneur, and chairman of the board of A Bank Information. Take charge of your financial future with Your Personal Bank. Now here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to Your Personal Bank Show. I have to admit, I was sharing some ideas, if you missed the last show, about reversing the idea of how we access money, create positive arbitrage. And I've gotten a tremendous amount of response from this. So, one, I'm going to say, look, if you missed the last show, go to yourpersonalbank.com, listen to the previous show, and I talk about creating positive arbitrage, how to create positive arbitrage without actually any out-of-pocket funds. I want to talk about this further, and the reason I think this is so important is it really comes down to the fiscal policy that our government has been pursuing really in earnest since 08-09. 08-09 was really a benchmark, a turning point, if you will, in terms of monetary policy, fiscal policy, the Federal Reserve, all those kinds of things. And, prior to that, the Federal Reserve has, it's had a dual purpose, a dual mandate, so to speak. Whether you like the Federal Reserve or don't like it, that's a whole different discussion. What I want folks to understand is, look, it's here. It's in our life. It's in our world. Until something changes, we got to deal with it. And to put your head in the sand and just say, hey, you wish it wasn't here. Gosh, I wish it wasn't here, in many ways. That's just not dealing with the reality in the place we're in right now. So, and like I said, one of the things my wife says to me all the time, she's always reminds me, say, look, the key to being successful in life really is learning how to play the game. And in many ways, it's a game of life, and how many of these things operate. If you look at it, step back and not get too emotionally involved, you realize it's just a big game. You know what I mean? And the key to being successful is learn how to play it well. Learn the rules, right? I always show this analogy where I say, look, let's say you take a group of athletes, and you take a group of very, world-class athletes, right? And you put them on a field or a court or whatever, and you toss them a ball and you say, play. And the first thing they're going to ask you is, well, what are the rules? In other words, you can be a world-class athlete and lose, you not win the game because you don't know what the rules are. And see that when it comes to financial literacy, sadly, we hear, I've seen it firsthand, so many horror stories, frankly, of what somebody's finances look like, their financial situation. And that's why I spend so much of my time over the years teaching basic financial literacy, because there's so little of that out there. And many times these are smart people. They're intelligent. They're sharp. They're good. But they don't have the tools to be really successful financially. They basically end up working for their whole lives, for someone else, for example, and not in a position they're not overly happy with. They're not happy with their lives, but they're doing it to pay the bills, and they never really seem to get ahead, if you know what I'm saying. That's having a lack of financial literacy oftentimes. Or they did do some things, they made some money, then they started getting into the investment world, and many times what I see is oftentimes take on far more risk than really they should, given their situation and financial position. And then, because they're really, aggressively trying to grow it or whatever. And then something happens, there's a market correction or an emergency, something happens, and they're financially devastated. It's sad. You see that so often. That's why I think Your Personal Bank is so powerful. It creates a foundation. It creates a foundational pool of money that has guarantees, basically steady, eddy, consistent, grows every single year, has tax benefits, and look, if something goes wrong, you got something to fall back on. And if it goes well, things go right, you've got compound interest working in your favor, and it just keeps growing and growing and accelerating every single year the rest of your life. So it just gets, one of my statements I always say is, first year is worst year, and then it gets gooder and gooder. People laugh about that, but it's very, very true. And I think Your Personal Bank creates that foundation to allow you to build on. I've often said, if you want to build a skyscraper, what's the first thing you have to do? Well, build a solid foundation, right? And the higher the skyscraper, the bigger, more solid the foundation needs to be. So I always tell people, look, let's start with the foundation. I know it may sound boring, might be dull, but hey, that's the beauty of it. It's boring, it's consistent, it's steady, it increases every single year. And then when you see opportunities, you can take advantage of them because you have the wherewithal, the ability to do it, and if things go wrong, you're still okay. All right? If you've listened to my story, I've done some of those same things. And I made those mistakes. And I paid dearly for them financially. And learned, so I say, wisdom is learning from somebody else's mistake, right? So I guess what I'm saying is we're living in very uncertain times. We're living in a situation where we got a lot of stuff going on, whether it's COVID or it's Afghanistan, it's inflation, it's, poor leadership right now in many ways. Federal, state, many state governments, I think, are very poor leadership. We have we have two separate economies right now and have had for some time. And what do I mean by that? As I stated in the last show, I've been doing some traveling this summer, and I've been in different states, and it's shocking the difference where you go into one state and you got to wear a mask everywhere you go inside, like in Nevada, and other places there isn't a mask to be seen, for example. And I'm not trying to get into political stuff here. I'm just pointing out the dramatic differences and I've got clients literally all over the country, and they tell me about, this place is a ghost town. There's nothing going on. The shops are closed down, and like where I live in, Phoenix, you wouldn't, and many other places, you wouldn't even notice that anything was different. In other words, things were just humming along. How is that all going to play out going down the road as we move forward and continue to go through what, many people think we're getting out of this pandemic situation, but our government, our media keep, remember the original mask mandates were for like 15 days. We're going to, go 15 days to slow the spread and help out the hospitals. That was over a year ago. In other words, government has a very bad habit of once they grab some power, they're very, very reluctant, very, very, very rarely give it back. And the reality is giving back this control level that they have has been very, very slow in some places. And I believe there's going to be a blowback from all of this. I'm hopeful of that. But you see, my point is it's creating situations that right now we just can't predict. And, this whole deal with Afghanistan, talk about a debacle. Probably some of the worst military decisions that have been made maybe in the history of the United States military. To pull out the troops before you pull out the civilians on a withdrawal is beyond comprehension in its stupidity. Just mind-boggling. My point is, when you have that kind of leadership, which is extraordinarily poor, horrible leadership, what other stupid decisions, actions are they going to make? And I talked about that in the last show. The southern border comes to mind, and terrorism, things like that. What's to stop a terrorist from getting through our southern border and causing havoc, a terrorism event in the United States? Sadly, and I'm not saying this to scare people. This is what security experts are saying, straight up. The terrorism risk has gone up significantly across the world, both in and outside our borders, since the Taliban took over Afghanistan. It's just a fact. We saw what impact economically and emotionally to our country and all that 9/11 had. What if another major terrorism event occurs, either outside, or inside our borders, God forbid? My point is the level of uncertainty is probably higher, certainly probably any time in my lifetime. And so diversification, having some guarantees, creating positive arbitrage, getting your money to grow for you and work for you even more. If inflation continues to rise, that's going to become more and more important. And as I was stating in the last show, and I'm going to talk about this further, so I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned. We often talk about ways of creating positive arbitrage, and the most common one I talk about, of course, is when somebody has some liquid assets, and for whatever reason, they're not overly satisfied with the returns or what it's doing for them. I mean, I meet people all the time that talk about, I have funds in the bank earning less than 1%. Why not earn 5.75%, 6% dividends on that money? I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer in my opinion, especially when you can do that with high liquidity, tax-free, and create a positive arbitrage. My gosh, do you realize that if you have money sitting in the bank versus putting it in the personal bank policy, high cash value policy, and let's say you're going to earn between 5.75%, 6% dividends right now, depending on which company we go with. And then you access those funds from the bank line because you decide to use them for whatever reason, pay bills, debt, or invest in something. And most of my clients were getting about 3.25% interest charged on those funds. So if you're earning, worst case scenario, you're making 2.5% positive arbitrage. Do you realize you're actually earning more interest by putting it in the policy, earning the dividends, accessing through the bank line, spending the money? You're earning a higher interest rate return than you are with the money just sitting in the bank? Think about that a minute. You can sit on money in the bank right now, and if you're lucky, make 1%. Or you can put it in a policy, earn 6 or close to that percent, tax-free if we set it up right, with guarantees, high liquidity, 50 to 85% liquidity day one. And then, and if you leave it there, of course, you're earning those dividends. But then even if you accessed it from the bank line and took the money and spent it, still earn more interest than you are in the bank, in most cases. You see what I'm trying to say? It becomes, when I share these things with folks, it literally becomes a no-brainer. It's like, why wouldn't I do this? And that's the point I'm trying to make, is it's not like when folks talk to me and they contact me, and like I said, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. It's not like I'm sitting there talking them into this in most cases. Most cases, I educate them, explain how this works, answer a few questions, and then literally it's, this is like a no-brainer. I get that comment, frankly, constantly, okay? Again, if you're going to earn more interest, take the money, put it in the policy, access it from the bank line, and spend it, and yet earn more interest than you are when it's just sitting in the bank. Why wouldn't you do that? Stay tuned in the next segment. We're going to talk more about this and some other good ideas. So
for more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. Really, we're talking about various ways, ideas of creating positive arbitrage. And this is very, very important, because I believe it's going to become more important, I believe, because we are in a rising inflationary environment. I talked about some of the previous shows where inflation rates, we've seen like business inflation rate year to year from July to July was all-time highs, like close to 8%. We've seen things like gas, fuel, used cars increase 40% on average year over year. That's a 40% increase in the cost of things. That's a tremendous inflation rate. And some have said, well, it might be transitory because it's our economy going up, getting going again and all that. I'm not so sure about that, partly for two reasons. One, our government has spent an unprecedented amount of money, $6 trillion over the last year or so, which is more than at any government has ever done in human history. We've never seen anything like this. And I've seen some numbers where it amounts to, something, I don't know if this is accurate, but it's probably over $100,000 a person. It's a crazy amount of money that's been pushed, is getting shoved into the system. And if you funnel that many dollars into the system, you're looking at a scenario where the price of goods and services are just going to go up. The other reason why I'm not convinced, I don't necessarily agree with the Federal Reserve, again, they're starting to question it themselves. At first, they were saying it's just transitory. Now they're questioning it. They're not sure. Well, I think they're wrong. I think it is. We're going to see longer-term effects on this over the next several years. Higher inflation we still have been, for the most part, in a bifurcated economy. What I mean by that is about half the country is humming along like pretty much back to normal levels, and about the other half of the country, or many parts, are barely getting started, if at all. See, I have clients literally all over the country, and I talk to them on a regular basis. So I have somewhat unique insight that maybe a lot of people don't have, where you're literally talking to people about business and economy and money and stuff like that from all parts of this country, coast to coast. And there's some of these folks I talk to in certain parts of the country, like, it's a ghost town around here. Nothing's open. In other parts, like where I live, you can't even tell the difference. What happens when, in essence, the rest of the country joins us and they get their economies up and running? What do you think is going to happen to inflation? It's very likely going to jump further. All right. Why is this also important? Well, if inflation continues to increase, you need your money to work for you more than it has before, because it's not going to go as far. And one of the best ways to get your money to work for you further is to create positive arbitrage. Now, a lot of people get confused about positive arbitrage. It's actually a very simple concept. Positive arbitrage is a situation where you're earning more than the cost of the dollar. So if you borrow money, for example, and a lot of people are hesitant to borrow because, we've been taught be out of debt and all this kind of stuff. Well, in a normal economy, I agree with that sentiment, that getting your debt paid off, paying off your house, paying off everything, and then just living off the income or whatever and retire makes sense. But when you're in an environment where you have extremely low interest rates, a very active monetary policy, the Federal Reserve doing everything they can, basically create a scenario where borrowing is more favorable, and an overzealous, overactive government, Federal Reserve, it actually punishes savers. It punishes those that pay off their debt, creates a low interest rate environment, and it makes it really hard on those that are really what most people would consider fiscally responsible. And what I try to help people understand is not all debt is bad. There is such a thing as consumer debt, and there's strategic debt. Look, I'm fully on board. Consumer debt is something you want to get rid of as soon as possible. And I define consumer debt as if you have to go to work to pay the bill, that kind of debt, get rid of, and get rid of quickly. Because if you, for some reason, can't pay the bill, you can't go to work, you lose your job, you lose your business, you get hurt, injured, you get hurt and can't work, so to speak, or something happens to the economy. We saw that with COVID, right? It can threaten your ability to pay the monthly payments on that bill, and that can get you in a lot of trouble. Strategic debt is where the debt is being paid by someone else's effort, and your personal bank is an excellent example of that. Oftentimes, we have people who will have an asset. Many times it's a real estate asset where they have equity. I mean, let's face it, real estate values have gone up in the last several years pretty much across the country. And they have some equity in the property, and they can take a line of credit, and if their credit is good, interest rates are really cheap. And you can borrow money at really low rates. I see 2% and 3% rates all the time. And look, if you're getting charged, say, upper 2s, lower 3s on borrowing, and then you take that money and invest it in a personal bank policy and earn a 5.75%, 6% dividend, are you ahead? And the answer is yes. You're keeping the difference. The money was sitting in the bricks and mortar, the equity, I should say, that was basically lying dormant, not doing anything for you directly, is now working for you and creating more income. I mean, I was sharing with somebody just the other day where he talked about he had $100,000 sitting in the bank, doing nothing, had no purpose for it, and he's making not even 1% interest. And he said, it seems silly to let that money just sit there. Why not put it in a personal bank and earn 5.75 or 6% dividends? I'm like, duh, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? That's what he said. But like I said, what if you don't have the $100,000 laying around? Or if you do, you don't want to, you maybe where the money is, there's penalties or interest, or you just don't want to divest of that asset. That's fine because you're happy with what it's doing. But what if you have an asset you can borrow against? And by the way, you can borrow against real estate, stock market portfolios, precious metals, antiques. I mean, any kind of asset you can think of. I have banks contacts I can connect you with that'll do a line of credit for you at a very favorable rate. And then you can take that money and invest it at a higher rate with guarantees, tax-free, and keep the difference. In other words, you keep the asset, but make the asset start working for you and put some more money in your pocket. And this is where I started sharing this idea, like I said in the last show, and got tremendous response with this. So I wanted to share with this a little bit more. Because again, this is a method that's used quite often by the wealthy. And again, it's not so much a secret, but it's the reason why so many very wealthy people, and there's many names that come to mind, where they're very wealthy and pay little or no taxes. I'll share with that in the next segment how they do it. It's really quite simple. My point is it's perfectly legal. They're not playing any games. You can do it too if you have assets that are appreciating in value. The key is being able to borrow against an asset where the value of the asset, the interest you're earning is more than the cost of borrowing. That creates positive arbitrage. Like I said, stay tuned in the next segment. I'm going to talk about this even further because I think a lot of people are sitting on assets and sitting on what we call dead dollars, dead money, dead equity that's just not working for them, and they have a need or it would benefit them to create more income. So stay tuned. We'll talk about this further. Don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. Today we're talking about ways to create positive arbitrage, sometimes without any out-of-pocket dollars. And I'm going to discuss this further, but, if you missed the previous segments where I was sharing this idea, of course, contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, it's 866-268-4422. See, what I'm talking about here is, what if you're in a situation where maybe you don't have liquid assets, or maybe you do, but these are assets that you don't want to, you don't want to mess with right now. You're happy with what's going on. Well, let's assume a minute you have some assets that might have some value. That could be real estate. It could be a portfolio. It could be precious metals. It could be cryptocurrency. It could be antiques. It could be any number of assets, just about anything. I have connections with banks I can get you in connection with that will loan you, do a line of credit using those assets as collateral. And they'll give you very favorable interest rates on that, pretty much in the 3% range, I'm going to tell you straight off the bat. And the thing is, if you take something, I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking that and putting that money at risk. You could potentially lose it. That's probably not wise in most cases. But what if you took that money and put it in something with some guarantees, some safety, some consistency? And like I said, we have companies that have been paying dividends at 5.75%, 6% rate or higher the last 26 plus years, never missed a dividend since literally before the Civil War. What if you put it in one of those? Well, what would happen? Well, if you're earning 6 or close to 6% dividends and you're getting charged, say, in the 3s, what's happening? Basically, you're picking up 2 or 3% positive arbitrage. That's extra money in your pocket, frankly, for doing nothing. In other words, the equity in those assets, whether it be a portfolio or a real estate or antiques or whatever it may be, you still own those assets. You still have those assets. They can grow. You can have access to them. You use them. They're yours. You own them. They're yours. And they can appreciate in value and all that good stuff. But you can borrow against them and then create a positive arbitrage situation and allow those assets, the result of that, create income or extra money in your pocket. I mean, who doesn't like extra money, right? It just makes sense. And again, it's how a lot of wealthy folks operate and how they grow their wealth further. And again, how they oftentimes minimize their taxes. I mean, a lot of people have been complaining that the wealthy aren't paying their fair share. Many of them have highly appreciating assets, things like stocks in their company or whatever it may be, real estate, whatever. And then they're taking a bank line of credit at very favorable rates, very low rates today, and accessing funds on a tax-free basis from those assets and using those to live on. Now, if you put them in a policy, we can create a positive arbitrage situation for you and lock that in, so to speak, which basically eliminates the risk. Now, what would happen? What is the risk? Let's talk about that a second. As long as the cost of the asset appreciates is more than the cost of borrowing your money ahead, right? Well, many of these lines of credit are in the 3% range, and there's many, many assets out there that are growing far faster, increasing far faster than 3% a year, right? And then when you put on top of that the fact that you can access this money through a bank line from the policy and create another 2.5-3% positive arbitrage, you can be literally in a situation where you're accessing and using the money at little or no cost. And the money's growing, you're getting more and more of it every year, and you literally have a situation where equity in an asset that was dead dollars, say sitting in the brick and mortar, for example, is now growing, giving you access. I mean, the asset's still growing in value. You still benefit from that. But now you have actually access to funds, dollars. In other words, your money's working twice for you. And oftentimes, if this is creating income for you, it can definitely reduce your tax liability, reduce your income taxes. So, which again, puts more money in your pocket, right? So my point is, this positive arbitrage idea of using an asset, using a line of credit, and accessing the funds is very powerful, especially given the monetary policy that we're in currently. And as long as we're still in this monetary policy, where it's easy monetary policy, Federal Reserve and our federal government is overactively involved in our economic lives, which they have been for the past, since 08-09, and I don't see any end in sight. Most people don't. Until they change their tune significantly, oftentimes this is a far better way to go with your money to make sure you have more money, make sure your money grows for you. Stay tuned in the next segment. I'm going to finish up on these thoughts with a few more things, so I'm certain you won't want to miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. Like I said, we're going to wrap this up, this idea that we've been really talking about today in terms of getting your money to work for you more, getting it to stretch, work for you more than one time, making your dollar stretch farther. And again, this is going to be extremely important as inflation, if we have inflation continue to rise, which seems increasingly likely as we go forward. As inflation continues to rise, we're going to see that's become more and more important because, well, the value of the dollar will go down, your buying power will go down, the cost of goods and services go up because there's more dollars chasing them. So you gotta have your money work for you more. Otherwise, frankly, you're moving backwards, not forward. And just straight up investing may not be enough. Getting positive arbitrage and coupling that with investing, along with with compound interest and reducing the taxes, you put all those together, you can get your money to work for you multiple times, go farther, go faster, and help overcome many times this inflationary challenges as we face them. So this is super important, and I want to try to boil it down so it's simple to understand. It's really not that complicated because when I say things like positive arbitrage and compound interest and inflationary cycle, frankly, a lot of people turn off. These are financial terms that are shared quite often. Sometimes can be quite complicated. They can be made into much more complicated than they really are. The idea of positive arbitrage, like I said, the main one is really quite simple. It's nothing more than you're accessing funds, you're borrowing funds from one source to then take those monies and earn for you. And the key is, as long as you're earning more than you're getting charged, you're ahead of the ballgame. You're keeping the difference. And why I share this so often is we have many people today who can borrow funds from equity in an asset that they own, whether it's real estate, stock, market portfolios, or antiques, or anything else for that matter, frankly. And they can borrow them at very favorable rates, very low rates, in the 3% range many times, and then can take that money and invest it, say, in your personal bank policy with guarantees, with safety, tax-free, set it up the right way, all that kind of stuff, and earn like 5.75%, 6% dividends. Well, folks, it's a simple question. If you're earning 5.75 to 6%, and you're getting charged, say, $3.95 for it, what's your money doing? The answer is very simple. You're keeping the difference. It's growing, isn't it? And many times, if you're borrowing these monies to create this positive arbitrage, you're doing it from sources. I mean, gosh, a lot of people can do this where, you can get a 30-year fixed mortgage on a piece of real estate and get it, if you get good credit, get it in the low 3s. I've seen high 2s even. Okay? So my point is, you can lock in long-term really low borrowing rates, cost of borrowing rates, and therefore lock in long-term positive arbitrage in your favor. And by the way, historically, the dividend rates, folks, 5.75, 6% is on the low end of the scale. In fact, we have companies that historically, as far as we go back, haven't paid less than that, and many of them haven't missed a dividend since literally before the Civil War. Okay, so we're talking about long-term dividend payers that pay these kind of rates and have done so for long periods of time. And I've got companies some of them come out and stated they're going to continue to pay these rates through next year and probably the year after that, already stating those facts, even in this low interest rate environment. So my point is real simple. You don't have to have money in the bank or an investment or liquid assets to create positive arbitrage. I can show you how to do that even if you have an asset that has some equity that you can access against. Well, decent credit score, things like that. If you want more information on it, contact me at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. But my point is, with the inflationary cycle, with the economy, with the uncertainty, with the poor leadership, in my opinion, poor leadership we're dealing with right now, whether it comes to the economy or taxes or government bureaucracy or Afghanistan or anything else, I think it's more important than ever that people take advantage of the opportunities that they have right now to make money while they can. The thing is, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but having more money in your pocket is probably going to be a good thing, not a bad thing, right? Having access to more dollars, getting your money to work for you more, stretch it out farther, all that good stuff. And if what suits your fancy in terms of what you want to do with those dollars, do you want to take those dollars and say put them to work and invest them in something? Frankly, I'm totally agnostic about that. It doesn't really matter to me what you want to invest that money in. If there's something you like, then, and if you feel like it's a good idea, then, do it. I mean, if you ask my opinion, I'll share with you some of the strengths and minuses I feel like with that particular asset, primarily from combination of personal experience and many of my clients. But ultimately, whatever you do with that money, I'm not here to tell you. I get folks that tell me they want to invest in all kinds of different things. And again, whether they want to invest in a business or they want to invest in precious metals or cryptocurrency or the stock market or real estate or whatever that may be. I was talking to a guy the other day who likes to invest in antique cars, okay? I mean, that's his thing, and he's been successful with it for quite some time. It doesn't really matter. The thing is, Do you want positive arbitrage or not? In other words, do you want to take dollars and invest them into that asset and create whatever return you create? Or do you want to put them in a personal bank, access them from the bank line, and pick up positive arbitrage, and then take those dollars and invest it in something? And as I state all the time, people a lot of times say, well, it seems too good to be true. No, it's not. It's really quite simple. Again, we have companies that have been paying dividends historically in the close to 6% range for decades and decades and, well over a century in many cases. And we have access to bank lines that are in the 3% range. And historically, I've got charts that show going to the past 40 years where the cost of borrowing is less than the dividends you earn. So again, you got a positive arbitrage every single month for the last 40 years. Now that's interesting because that does incorporate low, medium, and high interest rates environments. So historically, you've had a positive arbitrage situation. Basically, it's been around every single month for the last 40 years and continues to do so. The thing is, again, I can't stress this enough. The uncertainties that we have going forward, again, I'm not a doomsdayer, I'm not trying to be negative or anything like that. But I know over this past year or so, there were many times when my wife would ask me, she'd hear something on the news or whatever, and she'd say, well, what about this? And I'd say, oh, that'll never happen. And a month or two later, it seemed like it happened. And then something else came up, and that'll never happen. And guess what? It happened. By the end of 2020, I basically come to the conclusion that nothing's going to surprise me going forward. I'm not necessarily happy with many of the decisions and actions of what's going on, but it doesn't surprise me. In other words, we have to be prepared for the unexpected. I mean, who would have dreamed that our U.S. military would agree to a plan of withdrawing from a war zone, right? Afghanistan, and they would pull out the military first before the civilians. I mean, what kind of idiotic? It's just idiotic, right? How in the world was somebody predicted that they would choose to do that? I mean, the fact our military leadership actually did it without, I mean, they might have protested it to a degree, but certainly not strongly enough. They should just resign. They should have threatened to resign beforehand and said, look, Biden, if you want to do this, we're going to resign because this is fraught with peril. This could end up becoming disastrous. I know they're all trying to CYA cover their you-know-whats and point fingers and everything else now, but I think a fifth grader could have, I think a kindergartner could have figured this out, frankly. But my point is, what other stupid decisions are they going to make going forward, right? That are going to impact our lives and change, how our lives act and our money and our economy and all those kinds of things. It's unprecedented. I mean, again, who would have thunk that in the United States of America, you would have a situation for weeks and weeks on end, you couldn't find toilet paper anywhere. The store shelves were pretty much empty, bare in many cases. That businesses were just shut down. Who would have predicted that? I know I didn't. I couldn't have fathomed that a couple of years ago, not in this country. Yeah, in some dictatorships or communist countries, things like that. Sure, you can see those kinds of things, but not here. Yet, look what it's become the norm. And who would have ever thought, and forget the politics about it, but in many places and for many parts for this past year or plus, you couldn't go into a place without wearing a mask. I mean, who would have thought that would have been instituted in a country based on freedom? Who would have predicted that? I don't think anybody. So my point is quite simple. Be prepared for the unexpected. Have some diversification strategies. Have some guarantees. Get your money to work for you. Even those dead dollars that are like tied up in bricks and mortar and things like that, where you can safely and consistently create some income off of that to get your money to work further for you, which will help offset inflation. Okay? Like I said earlier, contact me at 866-268-4422 or Your Personal Bank for more information. Again, it's 866-268-4422. I'll do my best to steer you towards what, makes sense. It's not going to be high pressure or anything, nothing like that. I'm going to educate you and look at opportunities and give you options and show you where. Well, I'll give you a perfect example. I was just dealing with somebody the other day where they had some funds in the bank, and I basically showed them where they're earning nothing on it. They don't really have any need for those dollars at this point. And I said, look, why not earn $5,000 or $6,000 a year interest on that money versus next to nothing? And then if they do indeed decide to use it, still pick up at least $2,500 a year interest, even if they spend it, which is more than what they're earning now just sitting in the bank, right? And you could say the same thing about dollars that are tied up in equity, dead dollars, so to speak. Assets that are, the asset might be growing in value. You want to keep control of the asset and ownership. That's great. By all means, do so. But why not pick up the appreciation of the asset, whether it's real estate or stock or whatever, and then also pick up some income from it and some tax benefits? Why not? Why not have some more money in your pocket rather than less? And again, if inflation increases going forward, which most people believe, most experts believe is going to happen, this will become more and more important. I can't stress it enough. So like I said, I'm just going to leave you with this. If you want more information, contact me at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, it's 866-268-4422. And as always, stay tuned to the Your Personal Bank Show.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guest on this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Products and riders may have limitations and may not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Compare when considering a replacement. Dividend rates and baseline of credit rates may change. Contact yourpersonalbank.com for current rates.